The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty courtyard when Amara's world changed forever. She was grinding spices for the evening meal, the familiar rhythm of stone against stone keeping her hands busy, while her mind wandered to the book, hidden beneath her mattress. At 19, she had dreams that stretched far beyond the mud-brick walls of her village home. Her father's heavy footsteps approached from behind. Something in his walk made her pause. After 19 years, she knew every mood reflected in his gait. Today, those steps carried the weight of difficult news. "Daughter, sit with me," he said, his voice unusually formal. Amara wiped her hands on her dress and settled beside him on the worn carpet. The familiar scent of cardamom and cinnamon lingered in the air between them. Her father, once a tall and commanding presence, seemed smaller somehow, his shoulders curved with an invisible burden. "The Malik family has made a proposal," he began, unable to meet her eyes. "Their eldest son wishes to marry you." The grinding stone slipped from Amara's fingers, clattering against the courtyard tiles. Everyone in the village knew about Ghulam. Malik. The man was 42 years old, nearly twice her age, with hands that left bruises and a temper that sent servants running. His first wife had died young under mysterious circumstances. The second had returned to her family bearing scars that never fully healed. "Father, you cannot be serious," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible above the afternoon breeze. Her father's jaw tightened. The lines around his eyes deepened as he finally looked at her. "The Malik family is wealthy and influential. This marriage would secure our family's future. Your brothers could find better work, better marriages for themselves. But what about my future?" The words escaped before she could stop them. In their village, daughters rarely questioned their father's decisions so directly. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Somewhere in the distance, a goat bleated, and children's laughter echoed from the village square. Normal sounds of a normal day while Amara's life crumbled like ancient clay. "You are my daughter, and I love you," her father said slowly. "But you are also a woman, and women have duties. This is how our people have lived for 1,000 years." Amara's mind raced. She had heard whispers about Ghulam's treatment of women, how he forbade his wives from speaking to neighbors, how he locked them inside during village celebrations. The cook's daughter who worked in his household had once shown the other girls finger-shaped bruises on her arms, warning them to stay away when the master was drunk. "Father, please listen to me," Amara said, choosing her words carefully. "I have heard troubling stories about this man, his wives." "Enough." Her father's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Village gossip is poison, daughter. The Malik family has wealth and standing. They offer a generous bride price, enough to secure your mother's medicine for years to come." The mention of her mother's illness hit like a physical blow. For months, her mother had been growing weaker, coughing blood into rags she tried to hide. The village healer had exhausted his knowledge, suggesting expensive treatments available only in the distant city. "There must be another way," Amara pleaded. "Let me work. Let me earn money for mother's treatment. I could teach the younger children to read or help with the harvest." Her father's laugh held no warmth. "A woman's work brings copper coins, daughter. This marriage brings gold." That evening, Amara lay on her sleeping mat, staring at the ceiling while her family discussed the arrangement in hushed tones. Through the thin walls, she caught fragments of conversation. The wedding would take place within the month. Ghulam had insisted on a quick ceremony, claiming he needed a wife to manage his growing household. Sleep evaded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ghulam's face, the way his eyes lingered on young women in the marketplace, the cruel twist of his smile when servants made mistakes. She thought of his previous wives, their haunted expressions, their sudden disappearances from village life. The next morning brought visitors. Ghulam arrived with his mother and sisters, their fine clothes and heavy jewelry marking them as people of importance. Amara was summoned to serve tea, her hands trembling as she poured the steaming liquid into delicate glasses. Ghulam studied her with the calculating gaze of a man examining livestock. "She is thin," he commented to her father, as if she wasn't standing right there. But young, she will learn to please me. His mother nodded approvingly. The girl needs meat on her bones, but she has good teeth and clear skin. She will bear strong sons. Amara felt their eyes cataloging her features, measuring her worth in terms of children she might produce and work she could perform. The tea, glass shook in her hand, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Speak, girl," Ghulam commanded. "Tell me how you will serve your husband." The expected response formed on her lips, words about obedience and devotion that village daughters were taught from childhood. But something inside her rebelled. Instead, she met his gaze directly and said nothing. The silence grew uncomfortable. Ghulam's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, her father intervened. "She is modest and shy as a good girl should be," he explained quickly. "She will learn her duties." After the visitors left, her father's carefully controlled facade cracked. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "Do you want to shame our entire family?" "I was thinking about his previous wives," Amara replied quietly. "About what happened to them." "What happened to them is not your concern. Your concern is bringing honor to this family through a good marriage." But Amara had made her decision. That night, she sought out her eldest brother, catching him as he returned from the fields. Under the cover of darkness, she shared her fears. About Ghulam, describing the stories she had heard, the fear in other women's eyes when his name was mentioned. Her brother listened in troubled silence. Finally, he spoke. "Sister, I have heard these stories too. But Father has given his word. To break such a promise would destroy our family's reputation. We would be outcasts. And if I marry this man and he kills me, what then?" Her brother had no answer. The days that followed were filled with wedding preparations that felt more like funeral arrangements. Women from the village came to help sew her wedding dress, their chatter about flowers and festivities sounding hollow to her ears. Some cast sympathetic glances her way, understanding reflected in their eyes, but none dared speak against the match openly. One evening, as the wedding date approached, Amara made her final plea to her father. They sat in the same spot where he had first broken the news, the familiar scent of spices now tinged with the bitter taste of desperation. "Father, I am begging you," she said, her voice breaking. "Please do not force me into this marriage. I fear for my life." Her father's hand shook as he reached for his prayer beads. "Daughter, the arrangements are made. The bride price has been paid. To back out now would mean disaster for our entire family. Ghulam is not a man who forgives insults." "Then you choose his anger over my life?" The words hung in the air between them like a curse. Her father aged years in that moment, his face creasing with pain and something that might have been regret. "I choose our family's survival," he whispered. "Sometimes we must sacrifice one for the sake of many." Amara rose slowly, understanding that her father had made his choice. The next morning she would make hers. But as she walked toward her sleeping quarters, she felt the weight of an entire village's expectations pressing down on her shoulders, and wondered if one young woman's courage could stand against centuries of tradition. The wedding morning arrived like a thunderstorm, dark and heavy with unspoken dread. Amara had spent the night awake, her mind clear despite the chaos surrounding her. When her mother came to wake her with tears streaming down her weathered face, Amara was already dressed in her everyday clothes instead of the elaborate wedding dress that hung like a ghost in the corner. "My daughter, what are you doing?" her mother whispered, glancing nervously toward the door where relatives bustled about preparing for the ceremony. "The guests are arriving. Your father is looking for you." Amara took her mother's trembling hands in hers. "Mother, I cannot marry this man, I will not." The older woman's face crumpled. "Child, you don't understand what you're saying. The shame will kill us all. And marrying Ghulam will kill me," Amara replied softly but firmly. "I have made my choice." When her father discovered her refusal to dress for the ceremony, his face turned the color of old leather. The wedding guests had already gathered in the courtyard, musicians tuning their instruments, children running between tables laden with food. The smell of roasted lamb and saffron rice filled the air, but it turned Amara's stomach. You will put on that dress and walk to your husband's house, her father commanded through gritted teeth. I will not have my family destroyed by a stubborn girl's foolishness. Then you will be disappointed, father, Amara said, standing straighter, despite the fear coursing through her veins. I will not marry a man who beats women. The slap came without warning, sharp and sudden. Amara's cheek burned, but she did not flinch. Her father had never struck her before, and the shock in his eyes matched her own. Around them, the sounds of celebration continued, unaware of the drama unfolding inside the house. Get dressed, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Please, daughter, for all of us. No. That single word changed everything. Her father stumbled backward as if she had physically pushed him. In their culture, a daughter's defiance was not just rebellion. It was a crack in the foundation of everything they believed about order, respect, and family honor. News of Amara's refusal spread through the wedding gathering like wildfire. The music stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Ghulam himself stormed into their house, his face dark with rage and humiliation. Behind him came his male relatives, their expressions promising trouble. Where is the girl? Ghulam demanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to getting his way. Where is my bride? Amara emerged from her room, still in her simple dress, her chin raised despite the trembling in her legs. The sight of her everyday clothes in the midst of wedding finery seemed to enrage Ghulam further. You dare to insult me? He snarled, stepping so close she could smell the anger on his breath. Do you know what happens to women who make a fool of Ghulam Malik? I know what happens to women who marry you, Amara replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And I choose a different path. The gasp from the gathered crowd was audible. Women covered their mouths in shock. Men shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to process such unprecedented defiance. In 30 years of village life, no one had ever seen a bride refuse her groom so publicly. Ghulam's hand moved toward her face, but her father stepped between them. Please give me time to reason with her, he pleaded. She is young and confused. She is a snake, Ghulam spat, and snakes must be crushed before they bite others. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered. This girl has brought shame, not just on her family but on our entire village. She mocks our traditions and spits on our values. An elderly man from the village council pushed forward. What do you propose, Ghulam? She needs to learn respect, Ghulam replied, his eyes never leaving Amara's face. Public humiliation for public shame. Tie her to the old oak tree at the village. Edge for 3 days. No food, no water, no shelter. Let her think about her choices while the sun teaches her humility. The crowd murmured uneasily. The punishment was harsh, almost barbaric, but not unheard of in cases of extreme disobedience. Some of the older villagers nodded slowly, remembering stories from their youth when such measures were more common. Amara's mother let out a wail that cut through the afternoon air. Please, not my daughter, she is all I have. Then you should have raised her better, Ghulam's mother interjected coldly. A woman who cannot control her daughter has failed in her most basic duty. The village council gathered in a tight circle, their voices low but heated. Amara watched them debate her fate, feeling strangely detached from the proceedings. She had known this moment would come, had prepared herself for consequences, but the reality still felt surreal. Her youngest brother appeared at her side, his face pale with fear. Sister, please, he whispered urgently. Just put on the dress. We can figure something else out later. Amara looked at his young face, seeing the terror there, and felt her resolve waver for a moment. Then she remembered the bruises on Ghulam's servants, the haunted look in his previous wife's eyes, and strengthened her spine. I cannot, she told her brother gently. I would rather die free than live as his prisoner. The council reached their decision. The eldest member, a man who had known Amara since birth, approached with reluctance clear in his weathered features. Amara, daughter of Rahman, he announced formally, you have brought shame upon your family and dishonor upon our village by refusing a lawful marriage and showing disrespect to your elders. You have violated the sacred bonds that hold our community together." His voice grew heavier with each word. "Therefore, it is decided that you will be bound to the old oak tree for 3 days and 3 nights to reflect upon your actions and ask for forgiveness from Allah and your family." The pronouncement hit like a physical blow. Around her, Amara heard her mother's sobs, her father's sharp intake of breath, the satisfied grunt from Ghulam. But louder than all of these was the sound of her own heartbeat, steady and strong, reminding her that she was still alive, still breathing, still free to choose her own path, even if that path led through suffering. "I understand," she said simply. The procession to the oak tree felt like a funeral march. Villagers lined the dusty path, some weeping, others watching with grim satisfaction. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, confused by the adult drama they didn't fully understand. The ancient oak stood at the village's eastern edge, its massive trunk scarred by decades of weather and age. Its branches had provided shade for countless village meetings. Its roots had witnessed births and deaths, celebrations and sorrows. Now it would witness her punishment. The rope was rough against her wrists as they bound her to the trunk. Not tight enough to cut off circulation, but secure enough that escape was impossible. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she knew the coming days would test every ounce of strength she possessed. As the crowd began to disperse, her father lingered, his face a mask of anguish and anger. "You could end this," he said quietly. Even now, Ghulam might accept an apology. Amara looked at him with compassion, understanding finally that his anger came from fear. Fear for her, fear for their family, fear of forces beyond his control. "Father, I love you, but I cannot save our family by destroying myself." He turned away without another word, his shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. One by one, the villagers drifted back to their homes, leaving Amara alone with the growing shadows and the weight of her choice. As the first night settled around her, Amara lifted her eyes to the emerging stars and whispered a prayer, not for rescue, but for strength to endure whatever came next. The first night passed like a slow torture. Amara's back ached against the rough bark of the oak tree, and her wrists burned where the rope rubbed against her skin. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the sounds of night creatures and the constant discomfort of her position. When dawn finally crept across the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, she felt as if she had aged years in a single night. The morning brought curious children who approached cautiously, whispering among themselves. Their mothers quickly shooed them away, but not before Amara caught glimpses of sympathy in some of their young faces. A few village women passed by on their way to the well, their eyes deliberately avoiding hers, though she noticed one quietly drop a small piece of bread near the tree when no one was looking. By midday, the sun had become her greatest enemy. The oak's branches provided some shade, but not enough to shield her from the blazing heat that seemed to press down like a heavy blanket. Her lips cracked, and her tongue felt thick and swollen in her mouth. Every breath was an effort, every moment a test of will. Ghulam appeared in the afternoon, arriving on horseback with 2 of his men. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, his boots raising small clouds of dust as he approached. The satisfied smirk on his face made Amara's stomach turn, but she forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. "Having second thoughts yet?" he asked, circling her like a predator studying wounded prey. "One word from you and this all ends. You can have water, food, shade. All you have to do is apologize and agree to be my wife." Amara's voice came out as a croak, barely audible, but her words were clear enough. "Never." Ghulam's face darkened. He stepped closer, so close she could see the gold tooth that glinted when he smiled. "You think you're strong, girl? Wait until tomorrow. Wait until your skin starts to burn and peel. Wait until you're begging for mercy." He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Amara alone with the echo of his threats and the growing certainty that she might not survive this ordeal. But even as her body weakened, her spirit remained unbroken. She thought of the women who had suffered under Ghulam's hand and drew strength from their silent courage. The second day brought new torments. Her head pounded from dehydration, and her vision began to blur at the edges. The rope seemed to grow tighter as the heat made her wrists swell. Several times she thought she heard voices calling her name, only to realize it was the wind playing tricks on her exhausted mind. That evening, as the sun finally began its descent toward the horizon, something changed. Through her haze of pain and thirst, Amara noticed movement in the distance. At first, she thought it was another hallucination, but gradually she became aware of a warm glow flickering beyond the village boundaries. A campfire. Someone had lit a campfire in the hills. The sight filled her with an inexplicable hope. In her delirium, the distant flame seemed like a beacon, a sign that the world beyond her suffering still existed. She fixed her eyes on that small point of light as darkness fell around her, using it as an anchor to keep from drifting away entirely. Hours passed. The village settled into sleep, windows going dark one by one until only the moon and stars provided illumination. The campfire still glowed in the distance, and Amara found herself whispering prayers toward it, as if the unknown firemaker might somehow hear her pleas. Then she heard footsteps. At first, she thought it might be another villager, coming to mock her, or perhaps Gulam returning for another attempt at breaking her will. But these footsteps were different, hesitant, careful, belonging to someone who didn't want to be heard. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving cautiously toward her tree. In the moonlight, she could make out the silhouette of a man, but not one she recognized. He was taller than most village men, with broader shoulders, and he carried himself differently, with the confident stride of someone who had traveled far beyond these dusty streets. "Who's there?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely more than a breath. The stranger stopped, clearly startled to hear her speak. For a long moment they stared at each other across the small distance that separated them. Then he stepped closer, and she could see his face more clearly. He appeared to be in his 30s, with kind eyes and weathered skin that spoke of long days under the sun. His clothes were travel-worn but well-made, marking him as someone of modest means but respectable standing. "My name is Hassan," he said, softly, glancing around nervously to make sure they were alone. "I'm a merchant, traveling through your village. I saw the fire, my fire, and thought I heard someone calling for help." Amara's heart leaped. She hadn't realized she had been calling out, but perhaps in her delirium, she had been speaking her prayers aloud. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible through her parched throat. "Water." Hassan's face filled with horror as he took, in her condition, the ropes binding her to the tree, her cracked lips, the obvious signs of suffering. "What has happened here? Why are you tied to this tree?" Before she could answer, voices drifted from the village. Hassan quickly stepped back, into the shadows, pressing himself against the trunk of a nearby tree. Two village guards appeared, making their rounds, their lanterns casting dancing circles of light across the ground. "Still breathing, I see," one of them commented as they approached Amara. "Gulam will be disappointed. He was hoping you'd break by now." "Maybe tomorrow we'll finish the job," the other replied with cruel indifference. "The sun's supposed to be even hotter." They continued their patrol, their laughter fading into the distance. Hassan waited several minutes before emerging from his hiding place, his face grim with understanding. "They're punishing you," he said, and it wasn't a question. Amara nodded weakly. "I refused to marry a man who hurts women. The village council decided I needed to learn respect." Hassan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "By leaving you to die in the sun?" 3 days, she managed to explain. 3 days without food or water to make me change my mind. "And will you? Change your mind?" Despite her weakness, despite the pain that racked her body, Amara smiled. "No. I would rather die free than live as his prisoner." Hassan stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. His jaw tightened with resolve. And he glanced back toward his distant campfire, then toward the sleeping village. "I had a sister once," he said quietly, almost to himself. She was about your age when they married her to a man like your Ghulam. She died within a year. They said it was illness, but I knew better. He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. I couldn't save her. I was young and powerless, and I listened when my elders told me it was not my place to interfere. I've regretted that silence every day since. Amara felt tears she didn't know she still had the moisture to shed sliding down her cheeks. I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry for your suffering. Hassan replied. But perhaps it's not too late to make things right. He began examining the ropes that bound her, testing their strength, looking for weaknesses. These knots are tight, but not impossible. The question is timing. You don't understand, Amara whispered urgently. If they catch you helping me, they'll kill you. Ghulam has powerful friends. My own family won't speak against him. Hassan met her eyes in the moonlight. Then we'll have to make sure they don't catch us. He glanced toward the horizon where the first hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. I need to get back to my camp before anyone notices I'm gone. But I'll return tomorrow night, when the village is deep in sleep. Can you hold on until then? Amara felt a spark of hope kindle in her chest, the first real hope she had felt since this ordeal began. Yes, I can hold on. Hassan reached into his travel pack and pulled out a small water skin. I can't give you much. If they notice, you're too alert. They'll know someone helped you, but take a few drops. The water touched her lips like a miracle, cool and life-giving. She wanted to drink deeply but forced herself to take only what he offered. Thank you, she breathed. Hassan stood, preparing to leave, but paused to look back at her one more time. What's your name? Amara. Hold strong, Amara. Help is coming. As he melted back into the shadows, heading toward his distant campfire, Amara closed her eyes and felt something she hadn't experienced in days. The possibility of tomorrow. The third day arrived with a merciless sun that seemed determined to finish what the village council had started. Amara's lips were so cracked they bled when she tried to speak, and her skin felt tight and burning where the sun had found her, despite the oak's partial shade. Her head swam with fever and exhaustion, making it hard to tell the difference between reality and the strange dreams that came and went like waves. Throughout the morning, villagers passed by on their daily routines. Some glanced at her with pity, others with satisfaction, but most simply looked away as if she had already become invisible. Her own mother appeared briefly in the distance, standing at the edge of the village square where she could see the oak tree. The older woman stood there for several minutes, her hand pressed to her heart before turning away with shoulders shaking from silent sobs. Around midday, Ghulam arrived again. This time, he brought a chair and a servant carrying a pitcher of cold water and fresh bread. He positioned himself directly in front of Amara, just close enough that she could smell the food and see the condensation on the water pitcher. Look at this, he said, pouring water into a cup with deliberate slowness. Crystal clear water from the mountain spring, and this bread still warm from the oven. He took a long drink, making sure she could hear every swallow. All of this could be yours, Amara, just say the word. Amara's throat worked painfully as she watched him eat and drink, but her voice when it came was steady despite its weakness. I've already given you my answer. Ghulam's facade of patience cracked. He threw the remaining water onto the ground where it soaked into the dry earth just inches from her feet. Stubborn girl. Do you think your pride will comfort you when you're dying? Do you think anyone will remember your foolish defiance? I will remember, Amara whispered. And that's enough. Ghulam stormed away, leaving behind only the sweet scent of wasted water and the echo of his angry curses. Amara watched the wet spot in the earth slowly dry under the blazing sun and felt a strange sense of victory. Each moment she endured was proof that some things were more precious than safety. As the afternoon stretched on, her thoughts began to drift more frequently. She found herself having conversations with her grandmother, who had died years before, and seeing faces in the shifting shadows of the oak's leaves. Sometimes she thought she heard Hassan's voice calling her name, but when she opened her eyes, she saw only the empty landscape shimmering in the heat. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains when she noticed unusual activity in the village. Men were gathering in the square, their voices carrying on the still air, though she couldn't make out the words. Something had stirred them up, and their agitation seemed to center around a small group of strangers who had apparently arrived while she dozed. One of these strangers looked familiar, and it took her fevered mind several minutes to realize why. It was Hassan, but now he was dressed in finer clothes and accompanied by what appeared to be other merchants. They had several pack animals loaded with goods, and were clearly presenting themselves as a legitimate trading caravan. Smart, she thought through her haze. He wasn't sneaking around anymore, but hiding in plain sight. The day dragged on with agonizing slowness. Every breath felt like fire in her chest, and her vision kept blurring at the edges. Several times she thought she might lose consciousness completely, but something deep inside kept pulling her back. Hassan had promised to return, and she needed to be alert when he did. As darkness finally began to fall, the village settled into its evening routines. Cooking fires sent smoke curling into the purple sky, and the sounds of family meals and conversation drifted from the houses. Amara's stomach cramped with hunger, but the pain was so familiar now that it had become almost like background noise. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light. This worried her. Would there be enough darkness to hide their escape? But she pushed the thought away. Hassan was experienced, a man who had traveled dangerous roads and survived. If anyone could figure out how to get her away safely, it would be him. She must have dozed again because suddenly she was aware of movement nearby. Her eyes snapped open to find Hassan crouched beside the tree, working at the ropes around her wrists with a sharp knife. "Stay very still," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "These knots are tight, and I don't want to cut you." Amara wanted to speak, to tell him how grateful she was, but her throat was too dry and swollen. Instead, she focused on staying perfectly motionless as he worked. The rope was thick and sun-hardened, and she could hear his quiet frustration as the knife struggled to bite through the fibers. "How long until the guards make their next round?" he asked softly. Amara managed to croak out a single word. "Hour." "Good. That gives us time." He continued sawing at the rope, pausing occasionally to listen for any sounds from the village. "My horse is hidden in the grove beyond the wheat fields. Can you ride?" She tried to nod, then realized he might not see the gesture in the darkness. "Yes," she whispered. The first rope parted with a small snap that seemed loud as thunder in the quiet night. Hassan immediately moved to the second binding, working with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done difficult tasks under pressure before. Amara felt circulation returning to her hands, bringing with it a painful tingling that nonetheless felt wonderful. "There," Hassan breathed as the second rope fell away. "Can you stand?" Amara tried to push herself up from the base of the tree, but her legs had been in the same position for so long that they refused to cooperate. Hassan caught her as she started to fall, his strong arms supporting her weight. "Easy," he murmured. "Give yourself a moment, the blood needs to start flowing again." They crouched together in the shadow of the oak while Amara willed feeling back into her legs. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, and she bit back a groan of pain. Hassan seemed to understand her struggle, supporting her patiently, while keeping watch for any sign of danger. "Why are you doing this?" she managed to ask. "You don't even know me." Hassan was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the sleeping village. "I told you about my sister. What I didn't say was that I was supposed to protect her. I was her older brother and I failed. I've carried that guilt for 15 years. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "Maybe I can't save her anymore, but I can save you, and maybe that will mean something." They began moving slowly away from the tree, Hassan supporting most of her weight as they headed toward the fields. Every step was agony for Amara, but she gritted her teeth and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Behind them, the oak tree stood empty, its branches swaying gently in the night breeze. They had made it perhaps halfway to the wheat fields when disaster struck. A dog began barking somewhere in the village, then another joined in. Within moments, lights appeared in several windows, and voices called out in alarm. "Someone's discovered you're gone," Hassan said grimly. "We need to move faster." But Amara's legs were still weak and their progress remained painfully slow. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of pursuit beginning. Men calling to each other, the jingle of harness as someone saddled a horse. "Leave me," Amara gasped, stumbling over the uneven ground. "You can still get away?" "Not a chance," Hassan replied firmly. He swept her up in his arms, carrying her like a child despite the added burden it placed on him. "My horse isn't far." They reached the grove just as torches appeared in the distance, bobbing through the darkness as their pursuers began to search. Hassan's horse, a sturdy mare with intelligent eyes, stood waiting exactly where he had promised. He lifted Amara onto the animal's back, then swung up behind her. "Hold on tight," he warned, and spurred the horse into motion. They burst from the grove at a gallop, the mare's hooves thundering against the hard-packed earth. Behind them, shouts erupted as their escape was discovered. More torches appeared, and Amara could hear the sound of other horses being brought to chase them. "Which way?" Hassan called over the wind and the pounding of hooves. "The mountain pass," Amara replied, pointing toward the dark bulk of the hills. "There are caves there, places to hide." They rode hard through the night, the mare proving to have both speed and endurance. Several times they heard their pursuers behind them, but Hassan seemed to know instinctively when to change direction, when to slow down to muffle their horses, hoofbeats when to push forward despite the danger. As dawn began to break over the mountains, they reached the first of the rocky outcroppings that marked the beginning of the high country. Hassan guided the mare up a narrow trail that seemed to disappear into the stone itself. "There," Amara pointed to a dark opening in the cliff face. "That cave goes deep into the mountain. They'll never find us there." They dismounted and led the horse into the cave, which opened into a larger chamber lit by shafts of sunlight from cracks above. Hassan helped Amara sit down on a flat rock, then went to tend to the mare. "We're safe for now," he said, offering her water from his travel pack. "But they'll keep looking. We need a plan." Amara drank deeply, feeling life slowly returning to her body. For the first time in 3 days, she was truly free. But she knew their flight was just beginning. "I have an aunt," she said slowly. "She lives in the city, 2 days' journey from here. She never approved of arranged marriages." The cave became their refuge for 3 days while Amara recovered her strength, and the search parties scoured the lower valleys. Hassan proved to be not just brave, but incredibly resourceful. He knew which mountain springs provided the cleanest water, which plants could be eaten safely, and how to build a fire that produced minimal smoke. During the long hours of hiding, they talked in whispers about their lives, their dreams, and the world beyond their small corner of it. Amara learned that Hassan had been traveling trade routes for nearly 15 years, ever since his sister's death had driven him to leave his family's farm. He carried goods between distant cities, but more importantly, he carried stories and ideas. He had seen places where women owned businesses, where daughters could choose their own husbands, where education was valued more than blind obedience. "The world is bigger than your village," he told her one evening, as they watched the sun set through the cave opening. "There are places where what happened to you would be considered a crime, not a punishment." "I used to dream of such places," Amara admitted, her voice growing stronger each day. "But I never thought they were real." "They're real," Hassan assured her. "And if you want, I can help you reach them." On the 4th morning, they heard no sounds of pursuit. Hassan ventured out to scout the area and returned with news that the search had moved to the eastern valleys, away from their location. It was time to begin the journey to the city where Amara's aunt lived. They traveled mostly at night, following ancient shepherd paths that wound through the mountains. Hassan's mare proved sure-footed on the treacherous terrain, and her dark coat helped them blend into the shadows. During the day, they rested in hidden spots, abandoned shepherds' huts, dense groves of trees, or caves like the one that had first sheltered them. The journey gave them time to plan. Amara's aunt, Fatima, had left their village 20 years. Ego to marry a merchant in the city. She had visited only once since then, and Amara remembered her as a woman who spoke her mind and wore colorful scarves that scandalized the village elders. More importantly, Fatima had no children of her own and had always shown special affection for her nieces and nephews. She always told me I was too smart to waste my life in the village, Amara remembered. She said education was like water in the desert, precious and life-giving. Hassan smiled at that. She sounds like a wise woman. I think she'll welcome you with open arms. On their 5th night of travel, they reached the outskirts of the city. Amara had never seen so many lights in one place, stretching out below them, like fallen stars. The sight took her breath away, but also filled her with nervous excitement. This would be a completely new world, full of possibilities she had only dreamed about. They found Fatima's house just as dawn was breaking over the city walls. It was modest but well-maintained, with a small garden full of flowering plants that would have been considered extravagant in Amara's village. Hassan helped her down from the horse, then stepped back respectfully. "This is where we part ways," he said gently. "Your new life begins here." Amara felt a sudden panic. "Where will you go? When will I see you again?" "I have trade routes to follow," Hassan replied, but his smile was kind. "But merchants always return to profitable markets. I'm sure our paths will cross again." Before she could respond, the house door opened. A woman in her 50s emerged, alerted by the sound of voices. She had graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes, but there was no mistaking the family resemblance. This was definitely her aunt. "Amara?" Fatima's voice was filled with amazement. "Child, what are you doing here, and who is this man?" The story poured out of Amara in a rush. The forced marriage, her refusal, the punishment, and Hassan's rescue. Fatima's expression grew more and more thunderous as she listened, her hands clenched into fists by the time Amara finished. "That monster," she spat, referring to Ghulam. "And your father. How could he allow such a thing?" "He was afraid," Amara said softly. "We all were." Fatima turned to Hassan, studying him with sharp eyes. "And you risked your life for a stranger? Why?" Hassan's answer was simple and honest. "Because it was the right thing to do." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Fatima's expression softened. She invited them both inside for breakfast, insisting that Hassan at least eat a proper meal before continuing his journey. Over tea and fresh bread, she questioned Amara closely about her plans. "I want to learn," Amara said firmly. "I want to read and write better than I do now. I want to understand the world beyond our mountains, and someday I want to help other women who face what I faced." Fatima's eyes sparkled with approval. "There's a school here that teaches girls. It's run by foreign missionaries, but they're good people. I know the headmistress. With some work, I think you could catch up quickly." After breakfast, Hassan prepared to leave. He packed his few belongings while Fatima went to prepare a room for Amara. At the door, he and Amara faced each other awkwardly, both aware that they might never meet again. "Thank you," Amara said, the words feeling inadequate for what he had done. "You saved my life." "You saved your own life," Hassan corrected. "I just gave you a horse to ride." He mounted his mare and looked down at her one last time. "Remember what I said about the world being bigger than your village? Don't let anyone make you small again." Amara watched him ride away until he disappeared into the morning bustle of the city streets. She felt a deep sadness at his departure, but also excitement about the future that lay before her. The months that followed were unlike anything Amara had ever experienced. Fatima enrolled her in the mission school, where she threw herself into learning with the hunger of someone who had been starved for knowledge. She learned to read fluently, to write with confidence, and to speak the languages of neighboring countries. Her teachers, impressed by her quick mind and determination, began giving her extra books and advanced lessons. More importantly, she met other women who had broken free from traditional expectations. There was Layla, who ran her own textile business. There was Zara, who had become a teacher despite her family's objections. There was Miriam, who helped other women escape violent marriages through a network of safe houses. "You're not the only one," Miriam told her during one of their conversations. "Every month we help women who face what you faced. Your story isn't unique, but your courage is." Gradually, Amara found her calling. She began volunteering with Miriam's organization, using her own experience to help counsel other women. Her ability to understand their fear and shame, combined with her living proof that escape was possible, made her remarkably effective. 3 years passed. Amara had grown from a frightened village girl into a confident young woman who spoke at conferences about women's rights and helped run a shelter for those fleeing forced marriages. She had learned 4 languages, read hundreds of books, and discovered talents she never knew she possessed. Then, one spring morning, a familiar face appeared at the shelter door. Hassan stood there, older and more weathered from his travels, but with the same kind eyes she remembered. In his hand, he held a letter. "I heard about your work," he said simply. "There's a conference next month about women's education in the mountain regions. They need someone who understands both worlds, the traditional and the modern. Someone recommended you." Amara took the letter with trembling hands. It was an invitation to speak at an international gathering, to share her story with people who could make real changes in policies and laws. "How did you know I'd be here?" she asked. Hassan smiled. "Merchants hear all kinds of stories on the road. Word travels about a young woman who helps others find freedom. I had a feeling it might be you." They talked for hours, catching up on the years that had passed. Hassan had continued his trading, but had also begun secretly helping other women escape dangerous situations using the network of contacts he had built over the years. Their work had been running parallel paths, both inspired by that night when a stranger had ridden in from the Firelight to change a life. At the conference, Amara stood before an audience of educators, government officials, and activists from a dozen countries. She told her story simply and honestly: the forced marriage, the punishment, the rescue, and the new life that had followed. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment before erupting in applause. Afterward, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "I'm facing the same situation you faced," she whispered. "My family wants to marry me to my cousin, but he's cruel. I thought I had no choice." Amara took the girl's hands in hers. "There's always a choice," she said gently. "Sometimes it's a hard choice. Sometimes it's a dangerous choice. But there's always a choice. And there are people who will help you make it." Years later, Amara would look back on that conference as the moment her work truly began. The speech led to invitations to other gatherings, which led to funding for larger programs, which led to policy changes that protected women in situations like hers. She and Hassan crossed paths regularly over the years, their friendship deepening as their shared mission continued. He never settled down, preferring the freedom of the road, but he always made time to visit her projects and share news of women he had helped along his routes. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked during one of these visits many years later.